Teresa Mama, and I do a couple of things. I'm an audiologist, but I also do business in Nigeria. I'm from Nigeria. So I'm really happy to be here and I guess moderate this discussion. So we'll get started.
Check. If they do.
Okay. So first of all, I just want to ask everybody in the panel to introduce themselves and just tell us what you do just really quick. Nothing.
Excellent. My name's Zach Zebarth. I'm actually fairly new to Austin. I grew up in Wisconsin. I started an NGO in 2014, actually just last year, called Smart Roots Global, and we've primarily done work in Kenya.
My name is Kevin Tima. I'm from Houston, Texas, by way of Nigeria. I'm an author, just a film recently. A 95 real estate investment company building in Houston, Texas, and we're also doing some multi-family projects in Texas as well.
Hi, I'm Nancy Acton Bruce, and I am truly an African American, although I may not look it on the outside. I definitely am on the inside. I was born in Khartoum, Sudan. I grew up in South Sudan, went to school in Ethiopia, in Kenya, and in Egypt. Then moved to Liberia, and I graduated from high school in Nigeria. So I've taken all that. I've actually been in human resources for 25 plus years. And in the course of doing human resources, I discovered the impact of culture on workplace behavior and performance. And so I talk with HR groups in Dallas, Texas, where I live, about the impact of culture and how we might be incorrect in assessing people's behavior or performance, and we may be putting negative connotations to things that actually might be positive. So I do cross-cultural coaching as well, primarily with oil companies and systems.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to start the conversation. So the first one is going to be for you, Nancy. Okay, it's there's an increasing sense of optimism for the future, purpose about the present, the past achievements amongst the people of Africa that is fueling the hunger to make speedier and better decisions. What are the cultural barriers for the international partnership?
I would say probably the all-encompassing biggest barrier is cultural ignorance on both sides. Americans look at some African behavior and they interpret it through what I say is the American lens. And Africans look at Americans and interpret it through their African lens. And so very often that is incorrect. So I see cultural awareness as a huge, critical piece to doing business in Africa, both for the Africans and for the Americans. An example I like to use, I was back in Africa recently and I asked someone for directions, and the person I asked obviously didn't really know where I was wanting to go, but gave very elaborate directions describing the color of the building and the writing on the building, and there may be a goat tied to that tree and you turn right, and he sent me on a wild goose chase. So I stepped back and thought, okay, you're an interculturalist, so what is the cultural message here? And I understood that the cultural underlying value was hospitality. An African must welcome you as a guest in their country, and they must help you. If you ask for help, they will help. And in their mind, in his mind, he was helping me, even though he actually sent me on a wild goose chase. Well, if that happens in such a simple situation like that, what is the impact on business? If you give directions and don't follow up, don't make sure that there was deep understanding, you're likely not to get to the point that you wanted to get to. Another story I was called in to do some cultural coaching for a company that was going to do some assembly in Africa. And they had brought like a dozen Africans over to help study with the R&D team and the technicians here in the U.S. to get it all done. And early on in the project, the African team discovered that the American purchasers had purchased the wrong part. And it was about just 1 centimeter too small. So it was a gap in the place that it was supposed to fit in. Well, in America, probably, the Americans would have been comfortable going, hey, you guys ordered the wrong part. You need to reorder. But the Africans didn't want to bring shame to their American cardboard and folded it and put it in the gap, which worked fine during, some of the initial testing. And it came to the part where they actually were ready to go to assembly. And of course, the Americans discovered there was a piece of cardboard in place of the correct part. And they were just at a loss. Why wouldn't the African team come to them? And I said they would never bring shame to you as the American to say you made such a big mistake. So they did the African way. They figured out a way to fix it, and it worked. And so in their mind, they needed to never bring it up. But then, of course, when it came to production, it was a big problem. The Americans were frustrated. They lost time. They lost money. And there was great frustration everywhere. So that's just a couple of examples of how important understanding culture is, and culture, the impact of cultural ignorance in doing business in Africa. And you wanted to...
Yeah, so I completely agree with you, Nancy. And just to take that one step further, I think when it comes to the relationship, especially between American and African partnerships, we need to completely redefine what a partnership actually is. Many of the partnerships I've seen, in my experience in Africa, really haven't been genuine partnerships. I would consider a partnership working with others rather than necessarily working for. So I think that is maybe ignorance on both sides, and maybe even more so from the American perspective, is that a solution in itself can't really be sustainable unless the area where the solution is, the people there are invested in it. So I talk about my first experience in Africa was in a Berber village in Morocco. And here we were in the middle of this village with no electricity or no energy. Yet within about 100 yards were these huge, expensive solar panels. So we thought, how could there be no electricity? Well, the solar panels were implemented by a British NGO. Did not take a partnership approach when they put those in, didn't think about educating the people on what happens when these break down, or even bringing them in on this entire process. So that was just one example of where a partnership didn't work because it really wasn't a partnership. The other cultural thing I have seen, in my perspective, and you talked about, Nancy, this collectivism versus individualistic approach. And a lot of times, I've noticed those have kind of clashed. And one of the things, especially, is urgency. And that is one thing I think that's one thing that people of Africa could really foster, urgency and fidelity in the future. And we were kind of talking about it before we got up here, and the one thing is time. I learned what African time is very quickly when I got to Africa and doing work there. And that was one thing, sometimes it felt as though there wasn't enough urgency for the problems when that happened. But anyway, I think there's definitely, both sides have to really step back here and look at what a partnership actually is.
Yeah, I agree, and I think relationship is what is really, really critical, because relationship trumps task in Africa. And so often as Americans, we are so time conscious, we don't take time to engage in relationship building. And if there is no relationship, there really is no business, and to your point, partnership. It takes a lot of time. I think another kind of cultural thing, if you look at the history of Africa, Africans tend to be more present-oriented than future-oriented. Because in the past, they've not been able to count very much on the future. Government changes, colonialists come in. There isn't that constant that they can count on the future. So we, as Americans, wanting to establish some future orientation in our African partners, need to recognize that there's a huge gap, again, built on the reality. And that's where the collectivism and individualism comes in as well. In order to survive in Africa over the centuries, they've had to be bound together as a community against wild animals, against natural disasters, against colonialists, against other tribes. Whereas in America, in order to survive, mom and pa and the dog and the cook and the kids got in the covered wagon and headed west. So the way Americans survived was to stand up and be the individualist, be the best, be outstanding. Whereas in Africa, in order to succeed, they had to come together. And I think it's one of the sweet and beautiful things about people who you are dealing with is really critical. The impact of hierarchy is deep and broad-reaching. Task versus relationship, risk versus risk aversion, and direct and indirect communication. So these are some, and harmony and honesty. Because relationship is so important, this is one that is very difficult for Americans to understand and to grasp. The importance of harmony and relationship trumps honesty and task.
And just to piggyback on both of you all are saying, there's some specific issues that I'd like to touch upon. One, we talk about cultural issues and partnerships. When you come into another person's community, when it comes down to partnerships, you have to bring the resources to that community. You have to share those resources with the community. And also you have to bring people in on decision-making level. You know, people understand very well when they are just the labor, the grunt force. You know, if you really want to be genuine about the partnership, you have to bring people in the community on a decision-making platform. Not saying they have to take over your company, not at all. But they need to have representatives within the structure of the partnership who can actually make decisions. Because if they don't, they feel like they're being cheated. And that becomes a huge, huge issue. You know, initially, everybody's having, okay, we got a couple jobs coming here, but then after a while, you feel like, okay, our needs are not being met because our local leaders are not being able to speak directly to this company or this partnership. And also, on the flip side, I'm speaking about Nigeria because that's where I have the most experience. What happens is, it's hard to establish those type of leaders a lot of times because everybody considers themselves the leader. So locally, it's very hard to figure out if I want to build a road right down this line right here. I've got 4 or 5 people here saying I'm the chief from this tribe. I've got 4 or 5 people here saying I'm the chief of this tribe. Now, okay, who do we talk to get this road built? And in Nigeria, it becomes such an issue that they would rather the road be left unpaved than to actually come to an agreement and figure out what's going to be done. Because somebody is trying to gain from this road being built. When in actuality, you know, we will all gain when the road is built, but they're looking at the monetary right now. So that's an issue on both sides of the coin that we have to address immediately because it's what's tearing the continent apart, not just our specific country, but the continent.
Yeah. We're going to continue talking about it. Let me just go to the other question for you, which is very similar. At a time when the international community is discussing future development in Africa, all efforts are focused on putting culture at the heart of the development. What are the key areas where culture can play a decisive role in a sustainable development in Africa?
I spent some time this summer in southern Kenya in the Masai Mara, and in my mind, they are doing one of the most exceptional jobs of blending in culture with sustainable development. And it's really interesting the things they're doing. They put a few things first, and I think, and this is what I'm very passionate about, is education in Africa. In my mind, that's where the biggest investment should be, and that's where I think you can really bridge the gap between culture and also sustainable development, especially on the continent of Africa when almost, not even, maybe even more than 10 million graduates are entering the workforce every year. These are going to be the leaders for sustainable development. And that's one thing that I think in the United States we've done an awful job with. We have developed, but we've lost our identity, and we've oftentimes lost culture. So I urge Africa, as a continent, as they develop, to learn from the mistakes of countries like the United States and make sure that culture is at the forefront of your development. The other thing is conservation. It's been excellent to see the work being done there, especially in the Masai Mara. They're conserving the land and the natural resources. And the third thing that I'm really passionate about that I think can be at the forefront of sustainable development and tying in culture is agriculture in itself. One thing that I'm really interested in is in the United States, as far as agriculture, back in the 17th century, Congress passed the Morrill Act, where public universities could get land to develop universities that were essentially with the idea of being an agriculture-based university and tying in the community and going out and educating farmers. And that really led to an agriculture boom here in the United States. And I think that's something that could really benefit Africa, especially tying in the cultural components as well.
I think when we talk about culture, it's such a broad topic, and there's a lot of things that play into it. But there are things that we're doing in Africa that are archaic, and as times change, culture needs to morph and change with it. I know there's several instances, several issues where we pull on this word culture. Well, culturally, that's how we've done it for all these years, understood. And it's important to keep the base of your culture alive. But we have to let go of these archaic practices that are actually causing us a lot of hurt, causing us a lot of pain in Africa right now. There are things that have been going on for years and years and decades. And now that they did things in such a manner years ago because they worked years ago. You can't obviously expect things to work 200 years ago to work now in the present. So we have to stay cognizant in way as far as Africans. We have to look at culturally, what do we need to do? What do we need to keep? And what do we need to morph or change to actually, get into the 21st century and be successful?
And I think education has a huge role to play with that, because if people are more ignorant to what the problems are, or, how to solve the problems, they're gonna hold on to the archaic cultural. Did you have anything to add in, or? Okay, well, we'll go to the next question. Okay, the African continent is enjoying a demographic dividend, with the majority of its people being under 25, while life expectancy is also improving. This makes it a young and dynamic continent full of possibilities for its youth that can bring new ideas and bundle them with lessons from the wisdom of the older generation. How would you suggest to engage young African leaders to promote inclusive, sustainable development and gain a better future for African and nations?
Well,
Yeah.
go ahead. For starters, we need to really understand that, the life force of a country is its youth, right? And we have to pay very close attention to what our youth are doing. When our youth graduate from college and they go out into a workforce that doesn't exist, there becomes restlessness, right? There's nothing for them to do. And then that's when issues arise. I think we see a lot of unrest throughout the world because people don't have the jobs. They don't have anything going on. If I go to school to be an engineer and I'm driving a taxi and barely making ends meet, what's the point? It's no longer about just engaging you just to do it. I think it is imperative that countries understand that there has to be gainful employment for people who are young. We have to gainfully employ people that are young, and not only the governments, but our private corporations. Now, our private corporations come into Africa, and sometimes they bring people with them. Of course, you're going to have to bring some kind of structure with you, but you must hire people within the community. It's not only the right thing to do, it's good business practices, right? Because that person who works for your company, they're going to end up buying your goods. They're going to end up telling their family to buy your goods. They're going to be your marketers. They're going to be some of your biggest buyers, right? But think about if you do not employ these people within this community, right? Who are they going to be? They're going to be the vagrants that are standing outside your store that you don't want there. They're also going to be the people that potentially can rob you. And we're speaking metaphorically here. We're not saying everybody you don't hire is going to come back and rob you, but you have to be cognizant of that. You have to understand that this is a community, and if I'm going to come in here and make money from this community, I need to gainfully employ the people that are within it. And of course, if you can do that, then your business will thrive. It's very important.
And sometimes, I just from what I've observed, I think some young African leaders don't trust their community as much. So some of them trust outsiders. That's one of the problems I feel like we have to address.
Right, and that piggybacks again on the question before with culture, right? So sometimes the older generation will use culture to oppress these younger folks. There's, and it happens here too. We have your older people who are in charge who have wisdom. There's no denying that. But just because you have that wisdom does not mean you close off the table for everybody else. There are young people with great skill sets who can come and add fruitful knowledge to whatever you're doing. So that creates the mistrust, right? And then now you're looking at other people to come through because I've already been damaged from the people who I see. So now I'm only going to trust people who come from somewhere else. But that can be an issue as well because they could potentially do the exact same thing. So again, we have to shed some of that hurt and pain. Things have happened. We understand that. And not just from our own people, but from colonialism and stuff like that. And even up until this day, there's still issues going on in Africa. Okay, we understand that. Let's start from a clean state. Not saying that we have to forget entirely, and we understand and we have to remember it so we don't repeat the past. But we have to start from a clean slate and really engage youth. And that's what the whole point of it is. Because now our 21, 22, 23, 25-year-old, 30-year-old people are here, and they're ready to work. They're ready to be put to meaningful, gainful employment. Do not try to hoodwink them or pretend like, and that's another piece where I was saying, when you have to bring them into decision-making roles as well. Everybody knows when the grunt man, everybody knows when the laborer. If you can give everybody those jobs, fine. But also, we need people from our community who can make these decisions. And then you're empowered. Then you empower the rest of the people, because when we have leaders making decisions, they can go back to their people and say, you know what, this is what these companies are doing. This is what the government is doing. Let's come together and make sure this thing works.
And I think true mentoring, I have found that Africans are so eager to help me learn and understand, and so eager to learn from me. And so I think, to Kevin's point, part of that from a practical standpoint is really taking some of these educated, bright people under your wing and really mentoring them, really investing in them, really building a relationship from them. And as Kevin said, they can smell a skunk from a mile away. You've got to genuinely want to be learning from them, and they will be eager to get involved in a true mentoring relationship, to learn from each other and share the strengths from each other.
How do we foster a dialogue that promotes the exchange of ideas and innovative thinking among African policymakers to encourage and enhance research on economic and policy issues related to the development of the African economy?
Well, I think, to foster those ideas, that dialogue, first of all, it comes from the people who have power and the people who have money. So they first have to understand that you're not doing it just to feel good. You're doing it because it is for the best of the country and for your business. So anytime you want to motivate somebody, you have to give them a reason for what you want to do, other than it makes you feel good. Because everybody is not on the moral ground of doing the right thing.
Right.
But if it is done properly, this is what's going to sustain the country and your business. So you have to engage in this type of dialogue. If you continue to pretend like issues don't exist, or continue to pretend like people don't exist, issues occur that you have no way to stop. Because if you have 50,000 people in front of your factory who say they will not work anymore, or they're going to tear your factory down, and what are you going to do? Or if you have a coup come up, this is what creates these problems and issues. This is what, when we see, we've heard about these terrorist attacks for the last week or 2 weeks, and they've been going on all throughout, the century. The issue is, people feel like they've been left out. And when they feel like they're left out, they will lash out. So in our countries, in our communities, where we're from, we have to start these dialogues, or we're going to see more of this happen. So, that's the motivation. That's the reason why, this billionaire or this president needs to humble himself enough or herself enough to open the doors and allow genuine dialogue. And listen, of course.
Yeah, and I think, off of your point, if that dialogue's not there, then the economic growth doesn't exist. It's on the decline. If you look at the countries who haven't seen as much economic growth, it's been because of political instabilities there. So really, dialogue is where it starts. And until that's there, you can't expect to grow economically as a society without it.
I really feel like the rich really have the power, and that's who, personally, I think we have to find a creative way to get them to see the importance of really bringing the middle class and poor up.
Of course, again, it's what motivates them. What is the point of having a middle class? Well, the point of having a middle class is they're the ones going to buy your goods.
Yeah.
If you're the only one with the money, who is buying your goods?
Right.
If everybody's at the very bottom of the totem pole and it's just you up there, you cannot sustain yourself like that. It's impossible. So when you give them a reason other than it's the right thing, because people don't want to. Not gonna say everybody, but doing the right thing is not a good sell for everybody.
Right.
But listen, if you do the right thing, your business is gonna flourish. Okay, now I
You'll
see.
make this much more.
Exactly.
And you'll get this right.
There we go.
Okay, let's get another question. According to an African investor, family offices and high net worth individuals portfolio allocations to frontier markets are typically only around 5%, but they are rising as wealthy families are turning into frontier markets for new growth opportunities and revenues to help compensate for sluggish or no growth in developed economies. How Africa can diversify its economy, or how can Africa diversify its economy towards this sector that creates jobs?
Well, once again, in my mind, everything always comes back to education. So I get pretty good at tying everything into education, but I really do think it's key. One of the biggest problems I see in Africa today is secondary education for girls or for women. Without that equality in education, I don't believe you can truly have a diversified economy or a diversified society. So once again, every issue to me comes back to education, and not just the equality in education, but the quality of education as well. Those are my two, I think, key things for Africa, and I think it all ties into a diversified economy in the long run.
Definitely. And again, listening, opening that dialogue to other people. You have such a small pool who's giving you ideas. There are people within the village, there are people within the city, inner cities, and slums, or wherever, that have excellent ideas that can foster growth not only in the government, but also in the private sector. Now, if they're not educated, feel like they don't have the degrees or whatever, then they're not even brought to these tables, they're not even brought to these meetings, and then those ideas are dead. And if you have 5 guys or 5 women in a room who give the same ideas over and over and over, how can you stimulate the economy? How can you stimulate growth? You have to bring new ideas and new people in. You have to shed this type of thought process where I'm only going to talk to you if you have a $2 billion network. That doesn't make any sense, because of course, that's a very different type of thinking to the guy who just graduated from college and had to pay his way through, or the young lady who didn't have the quality education that she wanted and saw things that were mishandled from different companies and from the government standpoint. They're going to bring in the new ideas. They are going to bring in the new ideas that are going to change companies and the government. So the education and the dialogue is a huge piece that needs to be taken seriously.
Do you have anything to say?
No, I really agree. And again, I just want to say, we have to create the environment that will foster the sharing of ideas. Because very often, when an American speaks, everyone else in the room kind of shuts down, because Americans tend to bully and dominate. And if we will sit back and truly,
Yes.
if we will sit back and truly listen and create an environment that embraces the ideas of everybody, then I think we'll take a step forward. I think that's that listening and sit back and keeping our mouths shut.
And I think, sometimes the challenge is, like whenever I talk to young high school students about writing, creative writing about their lives, educating the West about the realities of their situation, they still, when I want to teach them, they're trying to give me what they think I want to hear. And it's a huge challenge. So I can understand why it would be hard for a Westerner to even notice it. So even if they may think they're listening, they got everything down, but the problem also lies on the fact that they're trying to impress the West so much. That's one of the reasons why I have a problem with the information that comes from, I'll speak for Nigeria, on what's going on. I was trying to tell them the West is depending on you to give them the right information. If you tell them it's fine, just like here, they're going to think it's fine, and you're not going to have any of your problems solved. And if you say it's horrible, they're going to, you have to be real,
Their picture of what horrible is.
Right, and so that's another challenge, to get people in the habit of telling things like it is. It's hard because of that. I think you mentioned it earlier. You kind of don't want to bring shame on someone. You want to make a visitor feel welcome. You want to make the guest feel welcome, so they want to come back. But they didn't solve the problem because you gave them what they wanted to hear.
In my cultural training, it's one of the things we talk about. I actually spend a lot of time with Americans, helping them develop this culturally sensitive ear to really hear what's underlying and to not accept that it's fine.
Or
Give me
observe,
some
I would say
examples.
observe first. That's what I do a lot, even if I'm
Observe, keep quiet.
Yeah, it is
Because what you
observe
speak
and see what the
changes the whole dynamic and will shut some of that creativity down.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I was going to say that right before you said that, and that was my experience. This summer we went to a school in Kenya, and the question I asked is, what are the problems in the community, and how can we work together? And like you said, it was like, oh, well, we'll talk about that after, but let's get some tea, and next thing you know, I've got a chicken gizzard sitting in front of me, and I'm like, I want to talk about the problems, but, and I think that's a huge thing that I think,
comfortable with someone.
yeah, it's very uncomfortable. So for me, I learned more about the problems actually through a middleman who was with us, and who was a native of Kenya, and that was really how I learned about the problems and how we might be able to work together. It wasn't even in that setting, and I feel like I really tried to listen. So I'm not sure how we necessarily combat that. I think that's something that's going to have to take shape within Africa and the people there themselves.
Yeah, empowerment, education, empowerment, opportunities. Because I think sometimes people are just living off of survival. You know, they just want to get the bare necessities taken care of, and then then they can just be happy. Or I mean, they want that's their priority. So be a doctor, you know, they don't think of creativity as a priority. So I think we have to be creative in how we help from the outside.
And if you take your own families, for instance, you know, if you have an issue inside your household, if there's some kind of abuse or something going on, you don't necessarily just go outside and tell anybody. You know, the first person walks up to you and says, hey, what's going on? You're kind of like, okay, can I trust them? You know, you can't just walk into a situation and immediately expect, even if you have the best intentions, you know you have the best intentions, but you have to understand that we're dealing with the history of people who have seen people come with the best intentions and leave with some terrible consequences. So just what you were saying about the relationship, foster the relationship first. You know, and that's why the gizzard was in front of you in the tea. You know, go ahead, drink some tea. You know, but the thing is time. You know, how much time do you really have? And you know you're on the schedule, but they have to feel comfortable. I need to feel comfortable with you before I tell you how bad things are right here, or what's going on with the root of my problem. So, you know, I know my father, he went back to Nigeria. He left Nigeria in the 80s and went back to open up his company. At first, he was trying to do the back and forth thing, right? He was trying to go to Nigeria for a couple of weeks and come back. But you don't have that kind of time. You know, if you really want to do great work in Africa, you've got to be in Africa and you've got to be in there for some time. Because
And
it's
you gotta
not,
be patient.
you have to be patient. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be something going to happen in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because the problems didn't happen in 2 weeks. The problems didn't happen in a year. So if you're really in there for change, you're really in there to have something sustainable, you have to be able to give the time. Now, do we have the time? You know, sometimes you even need that middleman who you can talk to, like, you know what, hey, please let people know that I can be trusted. Please let them know to speak freely. And when you have that middleman who can tell them, look, you know what, this is somebody who's here with the best intentions, then they'll open up. But when you're there just by yourself, on your own accord, it's hard to develop that.
But I'm saying that there are even some issues that I think they're in denial about themselves. Because even me as a Nigerian, when I'm talking to some people about the issue, they're like, oh, no, that's not that big of a deal. I'm like, you know. So even that, but I think you made a great point.
Well, and I think they also want to know how much skin you really have in the game.
Right.
And kind of to Kevin's point, you're just flying in, touching base, and flying out. Because I've been in a situation where I was evacuated, taken away on a U.S. Marine helicopter, and left my African friends there. And how committed, how much should they really trust me if they know I can get on a helicopter and be taken out, taken to safety, and they're left there in maybe a mess that I even helped create, and I'm not there to help them get out. So I think that's a little bit of it too, is how much skin do you really, are you really here for me, or when times get tough, are you out of here, you leave me here to face?
That's really good, yeah. So I want to go to questions and answers. If you guys have any questions for the panel? Anybody?
I'm from Southern Africa, born in Zambia, raised in South Africa. So definitely understand
Well, the American culture is a pretty interesting one because not a lot of Americans get the opportunity to travel abroad. So that brings, we have a thought process as in everything here is just like it is, you know, everywhere else. And I'll bring myself to this point. You know, I was sent to Nigeria to live when I was in ninth grade. And before I went there, I'd never gone out of the city of Houston. I'd never gone anywhere else, never traveled anywhere outside the state or even the city itself. I get to Nigeria, I met a young lady from Maryland. She's the same grade as me, and we were talking about grocery stores. And she was saying, you know, we have this grocery store, and I'm like, what, you don't have, you know, Kroger's or Fiesta in Maryland? She's like, what's that? And that was the moment I realized that I had not seen enough. I had not been anywhere. So the first thing we have to understand as Americans is that this system that we have in place is not the world system. It is just the American system. You know, and of course we think it's the greatest thing in the world, but there's very different ways we can do it around the world. And I think the best way to get that type of knowledge is the first-hand conversations with people from the continent. Open yourself up to speaking to people from Kenya, from Nigeria, from South Africa, from Zambia. I mean, I think, you know, that there's so many countries in Africa, you shouldn't shut yourself off to just, you know, one specific sector. You know, talk to people from around the continent, and they'll let you know, I'm in Nigeria, and I'll be in Ghana here, I can go to Cameroon and travel freely. It's not like it was in the past, and sometimes we don't even know what it was in the past. They just think that, I don't know what it's just hard to conceptualize there's a difference between America and the rest of the world. You know, I mean, it's something that you have to know, unless somebody teaches you that beforehand. And you know, until you open up those conversations, you'll never really know.
Until you experience it, or you go there.
Until you experience it or you go there.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment about it too, and I think, I'm not sure if this was necessarily your question, but it got me thinking of how, I think it is important for Africa though that these borders aren't as stake in the ground and that countries are collaborating more, and I think that's where sometimes maybe culture could clash. But I think the more that happens, you're going to see more economic prosperity. If we look at Europe, for instance, in the 1940s when they established the European Union, that's been, for the most part, good for Europe. So it's an interesting point, but definitely I think it's good for Africa when those relationships are made.
Yeah, you can go.
So my name is Donald. I train athletes. I'm a graduate in teams. I'm actually going to Kenya this winter for the first time in the African series to the coaches clinic. And I wanted to, you made a point, or you made a point about the relationships. And there was a point that you mentioned actually about like having time there and the whole skin in the game. And I wanted to know, how does that, for Americans particularly, I don't know how British people and everyone else are, but for Americans particularly, being able to spend quality time there, how has that hindered or helped different partnerships and relationships? If you give an example of that.
Well, I don't think, well, it just depends on what are you doing with that time. You know, if it's genuine time, if you're open to dialogue, if you're there to actually do good, most of the time it's going to go over well. The issues that have happened in Africa in the past is that, you know, it hasn't always gone over well, and people are not going over there generally to be a part of the culture of people. It's there to take something. So, you know, you're going there for a coach's clinic, you know, you're not going to snatch anybody up, at least I hope you won't. So they probably already understand that you're going there to give some kind of, you know, volunteer or help or give them some kind of assistance on what are you coaching? Is it
Sport performance, so training athletes, these are particularly soccer coaches, but
Right.
on being able to enhance any athletes and athleticism.
Right. So I mean, of course, a lot of athletes, I ran track in college, a lot of athletes want to come here, they're looking for that scholarship to come here. So, you know, they're going to be looking for you to show them, you know, what to do to come to American schools. So if you come there with a humble mind, you know, you understand that it's a different type of system, but you can show them what type of skills they're going to need to be successful here, what type of skills they're going to need as an athlete to come over and transition well. I think it'll go over very well. I don't think you'll have a problem at all.
You're really bringing something to them, so I don't think you really have to worry about it. It's more if you're trying to change something or do something bring something there that's gonna be left there for them to deal with when you leave, that's when you really have to think a little bit more.
I think sports usually is just such a bridge.
Yeah.
Right.
Because people get passionate about
They're welcome.
something in common. Two other things, I think humble is a key word. You know, you want to learn from them as well. So I think humble is a key word, and being able to laugh at yourself. Africans love to laugh, and there is no nicer sound in my ears than African laughing, because they just genuinely laugh. So laugh at yourself, and don't take yourself too seriously. I find that to be another real big bridge builder.
Yeah?
Pardon me for being late, first of all. I guess what I was saying as far as Brother Kevin was speaking on, as far as, of course, a lot of things that happen in the relationship that will build a lot of people that went over there to start businesses or do what have you. Went over there with the mindset of what they can do for themselves and where they came from and not necessarily for the area. How much distrust is there? Like, it's a two-part question. One, how much distrust do you have to deal with? You know what I mean? Like the process of getting past, how much distrust is there for foreigners coming in to work, no matter, what you look like, where you're from? Is there a lot of distrust that you have to go through and get past in order to be welcome to really get involved? That's one part. And the other part is, I've heard a couple of things, but I heard there are a couple of African nations that are welcoming diaspora and Africans, black people born in America, whatever, to come back. I heard Ghana. I don't know of any others. Is there any others that are speaking in these terms?
Well, I'll jump with the first part of the question. First of all, there's no way to really measure distrust, first of all. So it's an individual thing. So you never know what type of history somebody's had specifically. So you really can't tell. But what I will say is this, especially speaking specifically to the African American community in Nigeria, I rarely ever see people from African American people, Black American people coming to Africa, in Nigeria specifically. And I've heard a lot of people say they don't want us there. It's going to be there.
They don't like us.
They don't like us. And I was like, that is the furthest thing from the truth. If you look at the entertainment that's coming out of Africa now, it is mimicking the West. So people in Africa are like, oh, these are our brothers, our sisters, we want to see them, to host them. I mean, there's a lot of French, they're very welcome. The hospitality is off the charts. What you have to be careful of is when you come and you're looking to engage in business that is taking resources from the area. That's when you're gonna have to be careful. If you're coming there for a trip, for a holiday, or whatever, you're just there to enjoy the time. If you're coming there to do an oil deal, you're coming over there to do a cassava deal, you're coming over there to do a sugar deal, okay, now you need something from me. Of course you're gonna get something. Of course you're gonna pretend like you're my best friend. So
There's
what,
distrust even within Africa.
exactly.
So
So you're gonna have to deal with that. But within business, I think the most important thing is you don't just show up there when you need something. It's just like a friend, A friend who only calls you when you need something, that's not your friend. Every time you sit there, no problem, on the phone, like, no, I'm not gonna make this up. So if you want to do business in Africa, maybe your first trip should not be to do business. Maybe your first trip should be to experience the people, learn the culture, come there and just have a good time. And I guarantee you come there with that type of energy, it will be reciprocated 100-fold. And then maybe the second or third time, then you can start talking about, okay, I want to do this type of business or whatever. And you'll be met with a lot less distrust.
And that's a smart thing to do, because why would you want to do a business in a place that you don't really know your market or your target market? So you want to make sure that you're really, giving people what they want and need, and also benefiting, so there's a mutual benefit. So you wouldn't be able to do it if you don't know the people.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I learned from a mistake. I wasn't doing business, but we were bringing a program to help schools. And what the first trip turned into essentially an exploratory trip. We just put in all of this effort and time and had all these things figured out before we got there, and we shouldn't. Because the next 3 weeks turned into just sitting back and listening. I guess 2 weeks, the first week, I was just frustrated. I was like, what is going on? And then realized we need to spend the last 2 weeks here, just as you guys have talked about, listening and observing and really getting to understand the culture. I mean, it's the same thing And if you sit back and really realistically think about it, I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, 600 people, and I remember whenever there'd be somebody from Chicago come up to this little small town, we're thinking, all right, what are you doing here? You know, so it's home to people, and I think you need to respect that and really understand their home before you begin doing business there.
Yeah, it's beneficial for you too, like, you know, yeah.
Question. So do y'all have any recommendations about how to make contact, have a key contact with someone there that can kind of be your guide, or maybe a way to introduce you to people there? Because to your point, like, I'm afraid of Nigeria because I hear about all the scams, and I get the emails about I got 1 million bars of gold for you, just send me your bank account information, and so I know that they do business a different way there. I had heard about, kind of the corruption, and you have to know how to maneuver around that. So do y'all have any recommendations on how to make a key contact there that can actually be a guide or introduce you to different people?
Well, I'd say that two things. One, locally, okay, you're in Austin or whatever city you're in. Do you have places that have, whatever country you're trying to go to, foster relationships within the United States first, of that country you want to go to. And then they're really going to be the ones that tell you, okay, this is where you probably want to be, this is where you probably want to go. Also, the U.S. State Department, they have different types of programs where they've already have to set up, I guess, not shell corporations, but already set up partnerships that you can actually go to and deal with those type of entities that the government, the United States government has already started with. But even with that, I think the most important thing to understand is, yes, there is corruption in Nigeria, there's corruption in Africa, there is corruption across the board. What people are telling you is what they want you to hear, right? So if somebody tells you something about America, like every time you go to America and you go into a theater, you might get shot. Well, we know that not to be true. It's happened before. It's happened before, but that is not the theme of the United States. Corruption happens in Nigeria. It's not the theme of Nigeria. There are still people doing good business. There are still people doing things the right way. But are you going to run to those people? It depends on who you foster relationships with before you even go over there. You go over there cold turkey, you're going to run scam people. Scam people are looking for people to scam, right? If you're already doing good business, of course you're trying to foster relationships, but somebody who's looking to scam somebody is on the search for a naive person, on the search for somebody who doesn't have those type of relationships. You foster relationships now within the United States, but I'm Nigerian, if you talk to me, I'll tell you everywhere you go. You know what I'm saying? And so on and so forth. And where you shouldn't go. So you foster those relationships here with people you know, in a climate that you can trust, right? Because, you can verify people and everything in the States, and then they can tell you, okay, look, this is what you probably should do. Or they won't probably even go with you. A lot of times my friends want to go to Nigeria, hey, come on, I'm going. So, I can show you around, and we can have a great time. If you want to be, introduced to business people, then I can definitely do that for you too. So that's an important thing to try to do.
People, and I think people always highlight corruption to some Americans just because, in America, if someone says, this is what you'll get in general, if you go to a store, if you're trying to start business, you go somewhere, you usually get, if someone tells you this is what you need to do, you do that, you'll probably get that result. But in Nigeria, it just depends on who you go to. And I think if you're outside of your comfort zone, what's normal, you're not going to be able to spot who's scamming you as easy, as the local person. So I think what he said is absolutely right. You want to foster relationships with the Africans here and then get them to help you get there.
Well, this was a Nigerian who told me about that.
Yeah, but I mean, just.
And people have their own personal,
Depending on the person.
they've been hurt. And if somebody's been scammed before, even though their country, they're going to tell you, okay, yeah, it's like.
Right, I mean, people have tried to scam me.
Right.
And
I mean, but, I've opened up business in Houston, Texas, and I've had a heck of a time in real estate. I've lost a ton of money, right there in Houston, Texas, where we have all these laws and all this things going on, and people have duped me out of money, people have scammed me. So I can tell you right now, okay, yeah, if you're gonna build homes in Houston, Texas, be careful of this, and this. But I'm gonna tell you that because, obviously they care about you, and it's my experience. There are people who build homes in Houston, Texas, who haven't had a single problem. They'll tell you, no, it's the easiest place to build homes in the world. So you gotta be careful of who you get your information. Not careful, but be just cognizant, okay?
Yeah.
You're gonna get the information based off their history. what they've been, and telling you to be careful is not a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. But if I've been hurt before, I'm gonna let you know, like, hey, watch out, you know, because I care about you, so I'm gonna give you the right type of information.
To have lots of African friends.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what they're saying. The first time I went to Africa, I went cold turkey. Once again, I seem like I learned from all my mistakes, and I'm just telling you about it. Oh man, but that was not good. I was quickly on a plane back to the U.S. And yeah, I think showing up at events like this and just developing a network of people, I think is your best bet, and you'll be good to go. And there's corruption there, but there's corruption here, as we talked about. I'll never forget the summer when everybody was telling me not to go to Kenya because all of the corruption. These, of course, are all Americans who've never even stepped foot on African soil. And the first TV I get in front of when I get to Kenya, the news isn't about what's going on in Kenya, but it's a shooting back here in the United States. And it was just kind of the pinpoint to the whole argument that people are making. And the news is very good at this. So I won't go on a tangent about our media, but it builds this up, and it's really not realistic. So, yeah, I think it's great advice from them.
I have a Nigerian business partner. He is, I would call fresh off the boat to America. He is just fresh in America and then wants to do business. And I didn't even realize that a Nigerian could get scammed here.
Right.
And I'd be like, whoa, no, that is so wrong. I can't believe they said that to you, that they're scamming you. But it's a very polite way to scam you, and you wouldn't even notice it. He was really scammed a lot and didn't even know. So, and I educated him, and he'd be like, wow, you helped me, you saved me. So it applies to anyone going into a new land. You'll get scammed if you don't know what you know.
And I just want to say you are very wise to have a contact point person there to help you, because I'm just like when I don't live in Austin. When I come to Austin, I don't know. I was going to get online and get a hotel, and I'm like, I'm scared because I've done that before and ended up in an area that I should probably be in. So it's just always wise. So I think that's an excellent question.
Any other questions?
So, kind of like looking forward, so I'm going to Discution Wednesday, but like I train athletes, I want to have a business train athlete, and I want to be able to train athletes there. Right now my focus is really East African American because I'm reading about Kenya and Ethiopia, so that's my mind's at. But in being able to do something like that where you're trying to take like stuff that I learned here and go over there and looking at, okay, how does it work there? Maybe I can move here. At this point, I'm starting to think, maybe I just know where I cannot move. And being able to actually implement like a system of like, this kind of getting specific, but like I want to be able to implement a system how to train athletes, being able to make partnerships in business, to be able to make these athletes better, have it in the schools, to be able to like, grow that, and hopefully that helps a long chain reaction that I think that are going on in my head, to be able to do sports marketing, post on sports events, bring people there, down the other circle. But how does one, to talk about, be careful about taking resources away, how does one come there and then be able to implement something that might be able to go widespread, that might be different than how people are done?
Well, first thing you know what's needed. You have a skill set. You have your idea of what you're going to show and teach, but you have to first find out what's needed there. What different skills do they need to be successful? If you're talking about becoming successful here as an athlete, you're talking about becoming an international athlete in their country. So what's needed and what's the temperature of the country? What's going on? So I know in Nigeria, there's not a lot of athletic scholarships in college. So there's not a lot of emphasis in athleticism, in school, other than playing around, other than just if the sports is a pastime. We know in America, people are being trained from Little League. They're getting ready to go to the pros. They want to get the scholarship. So that's starting very early because there's incentive. We're not just doing it just because we want to, everybody wants to be LeBron James just because he can dunk with it. I know they want to be LeBron James because they got the, he got the NBA deal. But if there's no NBA deal at the end of the line, then what do we, why do they need to do it? What's the incentive? People are motivated by what the end goal is. And if you want to go there and really make a difference and make a change and give them something, find out first, what do they need? Do they do a lot I know in Kenya, a lot of our athletes that come to runners will come here to run. So is that something they want to do? Do they even want to leave their country? Do they want to create a program to where they can now have, where universities see the reasons to actually give athletic scholarships. Athletes make a lot of money from universities here in the States. So maybe your thing is to show these colleges, hey, you know what? Bringing students in on athletic scholarships is huge for marketing. It's huge for the university. It's going to bring a lot of money into the university. Okay, so now we can start that conversation to actually start that. So now I don't have to just go to the United States, if I can run really fast. I can stay within my country and then and do that within my country and represent my country. So really just check the temperature of the country out. When you go there, you'll see, you'll be able to see if you're really listening, what they need, what they want.
And sometimes it might change too, what your goal is. Like even with me, with some of the things I'm doing, I change it based on what's going on in the country. I'd be like, oh, you know what, they're not really gonna spend money on this.
Right.
So you know what, I'm gonna change it a little bit because of, based on what I see. So that's why it's important to go there earlier.
And just so you know, with soccer, right? So soccer's huge in Africa. You've got FIFA, you've got a lot of people in Europe playing. That's where the money is right now in soccer. We have in Africa, they have their own leagues within Africa and stuff like that. You got the Africa's World Cup and stuff and things of those nature. So again, what's the point? Soccer is huge, and they have soccer leagues from your 14 to all the way up to your 18s and so on and so forth. But you have to go there and really check out what do they need. Do they need you to come out and mimic another program that they already have? Probably not. They've already got the wheel invented. Don't try to go out and reinvent it. Bring something from here that is innovative. And we have a lot of innovative stuff going on here. And if you bring it to Africa, it's like, oh, you don't even have to make up these concepts. Yeah. You've already learned these concepts, and you bring it to a country, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, we can try that. We can try that. We see where the benefit of this is. So, yeah, you're gonna be fun. You got a good time.
Yeah, soccer. Any other questions? I think
I would just say for anybody getting ready to do business in Africa, or just going there to visit, it's an amazing place to be. Before this year, I never traveled to Latin America, and I was going off of what I heard in the news and what was going on. And when I went to Latin America, I went to Cuba, I went to Mexico, I went to other places, and absolutely loved it. And I saw the business opportunities and potential in a foreign land that I never even thought existed. So you're not going to know what's going on until you take that first step. So really coming to these type of things is the first step, networking, meeting people, and then the next step is hopping on a plane, and traveling over there. You won't regret the experience.
But I'm going to warn you, there is an African proverb that is so true, and that is, once the dust of Africa gets on your feet, you can never shake it loose. Once you go to Africa, be prepared. You'll be driven and compelled to return.
Make sure you use Google Flights. You can do really cheap flights now. But yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me really has been, obviously go get there, and don't think the solution that you come up with before you get there is the solution that they need. And it's just like anything, like you were talking about, it's like starting any business. Until you know what their problem is, and until you know if you're actually providing value to solve that problem, then you don't really know if you have a solution, and especially in a business case, if it's a solution they're going to pay for.
yes, simply put. Okay, we are going to close with this, if there's no more questions. This is really great.
Thank you for having us. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yes.
I'll let you 3 questions.
And thank you all, audience, for your attention and your questions. You had some good questions.
And I'll give you guys my card. We'll give you our card in case you want. We can be your we can be your African contact.
Well, would you mind taking a picture of this? Just enough that you want to use my phone?